I never expected that a simple workout session with my best friend would change the way I viewed everything. What was supposed to be a typical day at the gym, a time to unwind and focus on fitness, turned into something I never could have anticipated. It's funny how life works that way, how in the blink of an eye, everything you thought you knew can be upended. Let me start by introducing myself. My name's Tyler, and I'm 28 years old. I've always been the type of guy who keeps his life on track. Work, gym, social life, everything has its place. My best friend, Matt, and I had known each other since high school. We were inseparable, sharing everything from our favorite movies to the most embarrassing moments in our lives. Over the years, we both developed a routine that included regular workouts. Matt was more athletic than I was, but we made a solid team. The gym was our sanctuary, a place where we could push our limits and forget about the world for a while. That particular day, we were finishing up our workout, both of us drenched in sweat after a particularly intense session. We had planned to hit the showers after, like we always did, and then grab a bite to eat. I wasn't expecting anything unusual. Nothing had ever happened between us beyond the usual friendly banter and teasing. "Man, I'm wrecked," Matt said, wiping his forehead with a towel as we walked toward the locker room. "Yeah, me too," I replied, smiling. "But you pushed me hard today. I'm not sure I'll be able to move tomorrow." Matt laughed, tossing his towel into the nearby hamper. "That's the idea. Gotta build that strength, right?" We entered the locker room together, as we had done countless times before, and I made my way to the row of lockers to change out of my gym clothes. It wasn't unusual for us to talk or joke around while getting ready, but today something felt different. There was a subtle shift in the air, something I couldn't quite place. Matt had always been a confident guy, comfortable with himself and with me, but there was a tension I hadn't noticed before. I took my shirt off, catching a glimpse of Matt in the mirror. He was looking at me too, his eyes a little too focused, a little too intense. I tried to shrug it off, assuming it was just my imagination. But then, as I bent down to untie my shoes, I felt it, a warmth at my back. Matt had come up behind me, standing much closer than he normally would. "Need a hand with that?" Matt asked, his voice a little deeper than usual. I froze for a moment, unsure how to react. It wasn't like him to be so close to me, not like this. No, I'm good," I said quickly, trying to laugh it off. But Matt didn't step back. Instead, I could feel him standing there, his presence undeniable. There was a strange mix of nervousness and curiosity bubbling up in me, and I couldn't help but wonder if Matt felt it too. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there. I could hear his breath, steady but a little quick. I turned to look at him, expecting to see the usual playful grin on his face, but instead, there was something else. Something that made my heart race a little faster. His eyes were focused on me, and for the first time, I felt like I was seeing him in a different light. "Tyler," he said, his voice softer now. I don't know what's happening, but I've been feeling something lately, and I think you might be feeling it too." I could barely process the words he said. My heart skipped a beat, and the air seemed to grow thicker between us. I had never thought about Matt like that. We were best friends, nothing more, nothing less. But now, standing here, feeling the heat of his body so close to mine, everything seemed to shift. "Matt, I began, but before I could finish my sentence, Matt took a step closer, his hand brushing against my arm. The contact was electric, sending a jolt through me. I looked at him, unsure what to do, but before I could say anything, his eyes locked with mine. "I think you know what I'm talking about," he said quietly. The world seemed to slow down as I stood there, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. How could this be happening? Was this something he had been feeling too? I didn't know, but there was no denying the tension, the chemistry between us. I opened my mouth to respond, but my words caught in my throat. I could feel the distance between us closing, the space between us shrinking as Matt's hand moved to my chest, his fingers brushing the fabric of my shirt. I didn't know what was going to happen next, but something told me that whatever it was going to change everything. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as Matt's hand lingered on my chest. There was a heaviness in the air, an undeniable pull between us. I had never imagined that something like this could happen. Not with Matt. But now, with him standing so close, I felt a strange mix of excitement and uncertainty. Matt's eyes were dark, his expression serious. For a moment we just stood there, neither of us saying a word. The gym sounds outside the locker room seemed to fade away, and all I could hear was the sound of my own breath and Matt's, steady but deep. I didn't know what to do next. Should I pull away? Should I step back and pretend this moment never happened? But there was a part of me that didn't want to. A part of me that couldn't ignore the connection I felt in that moment. I had known Matt for years, but in that instant, everything seemed to change. He wasn't just my best friend anymore. Hey, thanks for watching until this point. Please leave a comment if you're enjoying the video. It really helps us grow the channel and reach more people. And hey, thank you very much. Let's get back to story. He was someone who had stirred something in me that I wasn't ready to face. Tyler, Matt started, but he hesitated, as if unsure how to continue. I could see the struggle in his eyes, the uncertainty. He wasn't sure how I'd react, just like I wasn't sure what to do either. But there was something about his vulnerability that made me feel more comfortable. In some strange way, it made me feel less alone in this situation. Before either of us could say anything else, Matt took a step closer. His face was inches from mine now, his breath warm against my skin. He reached up, his hand gently touching my cheek, and I felt a wave of warmth spread through my body at the simple gesture. It was like everything I had known, every wall I had built up, was suddenly crumbling. I didn't pull away. Instead, I leaned in slightly, the tension between us crackling like electricity. I had no idea what I was doing, but I knew I couldn't ignore this moment, this feeling that had taken over me. There was a magnetic pull between us, and no matter how much I tried to fight it, it felt right. Matt's lips brushed mine softly, tentatively at first, as if testing the waters. The kiss was gentle, almost like he wasn't sure if he was supposed to be doing this, but neither of us pulled back. Slowly, I began to respond, deepening the kiss. It was as though all the unspoken feelings, all the years of friendship, had come rushing to the surface, spilling out in this one moment. I could feel his hands moving to my back, pulling me closer as if we were both trying to close the distance that had always existed between us. My hands, almost instinctively, found their way to his shoulders, then his chest. His body was solid and warm beneath my touch, and everything felt so new, so intense. I had never kissed a man like this before, let alone someone I had known for so long. But in that moment, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. We both pulled away for a moment, breathless and unsure of what to do next. My mind was racing, trying to catch up with everything that had just happened. I could see Matt looking at me, his eyes full of vulnerability and desire, his chest rising and falling rapidly as he tried to steady his breath. Tyler? Matt started again, but his words seemed to trail off, as if he didn't know what to say. I didn't know either, but I knew that I wasn't ready to break the moment just yet. I don't know what this means, I whispered, my voice shaky with emotions I didn't understand. But I can't deny that I feel it too. Matt smiled softly, and his hand gently cupped my cheek. It was the kind of touch that made everything else fade into the background. We don't have to figure everything out right now, he murmured into my ear. We'll take this one step at a time. I nodded, resting my head on his shoulder. I had no idea where this was going, but for the first time in a long time I didn't feel scared. There was a sense of peace, of comfort, in his arms. Whatever happened next, we would figure it out together. The quiet between us was comforting, and neither of us was in a rush to pull away. I didn't want to think about the future just yet. Right now, it was just me and Matt, in this space, sharing something neither of us had expected but both seemed to need. When we finally pulled back, Matt looked into my eyes and gave me one last smile. It wasn't a smile full of certainty or answers, but it was soft and genuine. It felt like he was saying, "We'll get through this, whatever this is." And somehow, in that moment, it was enough. The days following that night in the locker room were confusing. Every time I saw Ryan, there was an unspoken tension between us, a shift in the way we interacted. We had always been close, friends since childhood, spending countless hours together, laughing and getting into trouble. But now it felt different. The casual touches we once exchanged were suddenly electric, charged with something neither of us was willing to acknowledge outright. We continued to hang out, the same as before, but there was always a lingering undercurrent that I couldn't ignore. I'd catch myself staring at Ryan in moments when I should have been focusing on something else. His broad shoulders, the way his muscles moved under his skin when he threw a ball, the way his laugh seemed to draw me in. It was like I was seeing him for the first time, and it left me unsettled. It wasn't until we were alone again that night, just the two of us in the locker room after practice, that the real shift occurred. As usual, we were getting changed, the sound of lockers closing and the occasional rustle of clothes the only noise. But this time I was acutely aware of every movement he made, the way his body shifted and stretched as he changed. My pulse quickened, and I struggled to focus, knowing that he had no idea how much his presence was affecting me. Ryan was always the first to finish. He was quick and efficient, slipping on his clothes and heading toward the door. But tonight, I wasn't ready for him to leave. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something was pulling me in, making me want to keep him there just a little longer. "Hey, wait up!" I called out, my voice sounding almost too eager even to my own ears. Ryan paused and turned back to me, his brow furrowing slightly. "What's up?" he asked, clearly a bit surprised by my sudden request. Nothing," I said, shaking my head. "Just, you're in a rush?" He hesitated for a moment, and then smiled. "Nah, I'm good. Just thought I'd get going before it gets too late." He walked back toward me, standing closer than I expected. His presence seemed to fill the room, the air between us thickening in a way I hadn't felt before. I shifted uncomfortably, trying to think of something to say to cover up how much I was suddenly aware of him. "It's just, I don't know, you seem a little off today," I managed, my voice softer than usual. Ryan raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. He simply reached over to the bench, grabbed his water bottle and took a long sip. "I'm fine. Just tired," he muttered. But I noticed the way his eyes lingered on me for a moment too long, how the air between us seemed charged. Without thinking, I shifted closer to him, just a few inches, barely anything noticeable. But it was enough to make the tension between us even more palpable. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I felt a flush creeping up my neck. Ryan didn't move away, but neither of us spoke. It was like we were both waiting for something. An invitation, a sign, or maybe the courage to take the next step. Finally, Ryan broke the silence. "You're acting weird," he said, his voice low. "What's going on?" I swallowed hard, unsure of how to explain what was happening inside me. How could I? I couldn't even fully understand it myself. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice shaky. I think something's changed between us." Ryan stared at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, without warning, he closed the gap between us, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder. The touch was brief but intense, and it sent a shock through my body, the kind I had never experienced before. "Yeah," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I think I feel it too." The words hung in the air, a shared understanding between us that neither of us had expected, but both had felt. There was no going back now, and neither of us wanted to. Ryan's hand lingered on my shoulder, his fingers brushing against my skin, and I felt myself leaning into it. My pulse was racing, and my body was begging me to respond, to close the distance between us, but I still couldn't bring myself to make the move. Ryan seemed to sense my hesitation. He stepped a little closer, his chest brushing against mine as his other hand reached up to gently cup my cheek. I could feel the heat of his body against mine, and I wanted nothing more than to close my eyes and surrender to the moment. But still, I hesitated. "You're scared, aren't you?" Ryan murmured, his breath hot against my ear. I nodded, unable to speak, the reality of what was happening finally sinking in. We had crossed a line, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for it. But the way Ryan was looking at me, so focused, so certain, made me want to throw caution to the wind. "You don't have to be," Ryan continued, his lips brushing my ear as he spoke. "I'm not going anywhere." The words were a comfort, but they also ignited something in me, a spark I couldn't deny. I closed my eyes and let myself feel the moment, let myself feel him. I could feel his lips just a breath away, and I didn't fight it any longer. I leaned in, my lips brushing against his in a tentative kiss. The contact was soft at first, a gentle exploration. But as soon as our mouths met, I felt the world around us disappear. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I was consumed by the warmth of his touch, the pressure of his body against mine. I pulled him closer, deepening the kiss, allowing the emotions that had been building between us to surface. The tension, the connection, everything we had tried to ignore was now out in the open, and there was no turning back. As we pulled away, our breathing ragged, we both knew what had just happened. But there was no need for words. We were both in this together, and I couldn't deny that whatever this was, it was something we both wanted. The following days were strange. Every interaction with Ryan felt different, charged, as if the kiss in the locker room had unlocked something we couldn't close again. We avoided talking about it, as though addressing it would make it real. Instead, we kept up our usual routine, hanging out, joking, and doing what we always did. But it wasn't the same anymore. I could feel it in every glance, every touch. Our friendship had always been easy, effortless. We were two guys who could spend hours talking about anything, laughing until our stomachs hurt. But now, everything felt laced with something deeper. Every time our hands brushed, every time we bumped into each other, my body would react. My heart would race, and I'd feel that familiar tension tightening in my chest. I knew Ryan felt it too. There were moments when I'd catch him staring at me, and I'd do my best to look away, pretending I hadn't noticed. But it was impossible to ignore. One evening, after a long week of avoiding the topic, we found ourselves at a small cafe after the gym. We sat in a booth, the dim lighting casting a soft glow over us. It was comfortable, but I could tell Ryan wasn't at ease. He fidgeted with his drink, glancing at me every now and then as though he wanted to say something but wasn't sure how. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "Ryan, what's going on?" I asked, my voice low, trying to keep the calm that had been lacking for days. He looked up at me, his expression a mixture of frustration and uncertainty. "I don't know, man," he said, his voice strained. "This whole thing, it feels different. Like, I don't know what to do with it." His words hit me harder than I expected. I had been feeling the same way, but hearing him say it out loud made it more real. "I get it," I said quietly, my fingers tapping on the table. "It's like everything changed, but we're just pretending it didn't. Like nothing happened." Ryan's gaze softened, and for the first time in days, I saw him truly look at me, really look at me. "Yeah, I think I've been avoiding it because I don't know how this fits in our friendship. I don't want to screw it up. I care about you, and I don't want things to be weird between us." His honesty surprised me, and I realized that I felt the same way. I cared about him too, probably more than I ever admitted to myself. But at that moment, the fear of ruining what we had still held me back. "Ryan, I don't want to lose what we have either," I said, my voice softer now. "But I think we need to talk about what happened. We can't just act like it's nothing. It's not nothing." He nodded, a slight frown forming on his face as he looked down at his drink. "I don't want to rush into anything, though. I'm not sure what this is, but I don't want to make a mistake." We sat in silence for a moment, both of us processing what was happening. I could feel the weight of the conversation hanging over us. This wasn't just some casual flirtation anymore. It was something real, something that required attention. I knew we had to figure this out before it got even more complicated. "I'm not in a rush either," I said, my voice steady. "I just want to understand what this is. Whatever it is, I don't want to lose you as a friend." Ryan smiled at me, the tension easing slightly in his eyes. "I don't want to lose you either. So we'll figure this out together." That moment, there was a shift. It wasn't a resolution, but it was a step forward. We both knew there were still a lot of questions, but we were willing to face them together, no matter what. The uncertainty was still there, but now it felt like we could navigate it. After that conversation, things didn't immediately go back to normal, but they did start to shift. We still spent time together, hanging out, working out at the gym, grabbing lunch after practice, but the space between us felt different. The subtle tension from before had increased, like a soft hum vibrating between us that neither of us could ignore. It was unspoken, but it was there, lingering in every shared glance, every accidental touch. The first time it happened again was during one of our gym sessions. We were lifting weights, pushing each other through the usual routine. I could feel the heat of Ryan's body next to mine as we swapped sets on the bench press. There was something about his proximity, the way his arm brushed against mine as he grabbed the dumbbell, that made my pulse quicken. I tried to focus on my reps, but it was hard to ignore the way my body reacted, the way my skin tingled under the touch. When we finished, Ryan looked at me, a glint of something in his eyes that I couldn't quite place. "You good?" he asked, his voice low, but there was something in it, something I had never noticed before, a familiarity mixed with something else, something new. Yeah, I replied, my voice a little rougher than I expected. "Just tired, I guess." Ryan didn't seem convinced. He studied me for a moment before nodding. "Right? You sure?" I nodded, trying to hide the fact that my heart was still racing from the brief contact, from the look he had given me. We finished the workout in silence, but I could feel his presence in the space between us more acutely than ever before. Later that night, as we sat on the couch in my apartment, our usual routine was disrupted by the weight of what had happened. We had always spent hours watching TV and joking around, but tonight, the words didn't come as easily. Every time I glanced at Ryan, I found him looking at me, his gaze intense and searching, like he was trying to read me. The tension between us grew heavier, thicker, with every passing minute. Finally, I couldn't stand it anymore. I needed to know if he felt it too, if he was as confused as I was. "Ryan," I said, turning toward him. "What is this? Why is everything suddenly so different?" Ryan shifted uncomfortably, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know, man. I'm not sure how to explain it. I think we both felt something when we kissed, and I can't stop thinking about it. But I'm scared. Scared of what it means. Scared of how it's going to change things between us." I exhaled sharply, my mind racing. It was exactly how I felt. "Me too," I said, the words coming out almost in a whisper. "But I don't want to pretend it didn't happen. I can't ignore it anymore." Ryan stared at me for a long moment, his lips slightly parted as if he was about to say something but couldn't find the words. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet but steady. "We need to figure this out, right? Together." I nodded, my heart pounding. "Yeah, together." The air between us was charged with uncertainty, but it was also filled with something more, something undeniable, something neither of us could deny. We didn't have all the answers, but we were both ready to take the next step, to figure this out, to explore what it meant. The following days were filled with uncertainty and anticipation. We still spent time together, but every second felt charged, as if we were waiting for something to happen. Something neither of us had the courage to start. It was like we were both waiting for the other to take that final step, to admit what we both felt but hadn't yet said. The next time we were in the locker room after practice, the tension between us was almost unbearable. We were changing out of our gear, the usual routine we'd done 100 times before, but now everything felt different. The sound of the lockers opening and closing seemed louder, the air heavier. I could feel Ryan's presence behind me, even though we were both doing our own thing. It was like every small movement, every breath was somehow amplified. As I pulled my shirt over my head, I caught sight of Ryan in the mirror. He was standing there, shirtless, his muscles flexing as he moved. I couldn't help but admire the way his body had taken on a more defined shape, how strong and confident he looked. He caught my eye in the mirror, and for a moment, neither of us moved. "Steve," he said, his voice low and almost hesitant. Are you sure about this? I swallowed, trying to gather my thoughts. I don't know, I admitted, my voice shaky. I can't pretend I don't feel this anymore. I'm not sure where it's going, but I can't just ignore it. Ryan nodded, his gaze lingering on me. He took a step closer, the space between us shrinking, the air thick with unspoken words. I feel it too, Steve, more than I thought I would. And I don't want to mess this up, but I can't keep pretending that nothing's going on between us. My heart raced, the words he spoke hitting me harder than I expected. It was everything I wanted to hear, but it also made everything feel more real, more complicated. I stepped toward him, not thinking, just reacting to the pull I had been feeling ever since that first kiss. As I reached him, I could see the vulnerability in his eyes, the same fear I felt mirrored in his expression. But there was something else too, something stronger, a quiet determination. I think we need to talk about it, Ryan said, his voice barely above a whisper. But I don't know how. I don't want things to get weird between us. They already are weird. I laughed softly, the nervous tension easing just a little. But I don't want to walk away from this either. I don't want to ignore what's happening. He smiled, and it was small, almost shy, but there was a warmth in it that made my heart beat faster. Without another word, he closed the gap between us, his hand finding mine. The touch was electric. The moment we locked eyes, there was no going back. No more pretending that this wasn't something that had the potential to change everything. Ryan leaned in slowly, as if asking for permission without speaking. I nodded, and in that moment he kissed me again. It was gentle at first, as though we were both still testing the waters. But as the kiss deepened, it was clear that the uncertainty had faded. The desire we had been holding back, the feelings we had been avoiding, surged to the surface. I responded to the kiss, my hands moving up to rest on his shoulders, pulling him closer. Every part of me seemed to awaken, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be. With Ryan. No confusion, no doubt. Just us. We didn't rush. The kiss was slow, deliberate, filled with everything we had been holding back. My hands moved down his chest, feeling the strong muscles beneath his skin. He responded in kind, his hands brushing against my back, sending a wave of warmth through me. We paused for a moment, breathing heavily, our foreheads resting against each other. Are you sure? Ryan asked again, his voice hushed, almost uncertain. I smiled, the answer clear in my heart. I'm sure. And in that moment, I knew that this was the start of something real, something new. Whatever was ahead for us, we would face it together. There was no turning back now. The days after our heated moment in the locker room were strange, but in a way they also felt like a weight had been lifted. We didn't speak much about what happened, but there was no denying that something between us had shifted. There was a quiet understanding between us, like a bond had been forged in those moments. Every glance we shared, every subtle touch, carried an unspoken message. I still felt the lingering heat of our connection, especially in the small moments when we were near each other. His hand brushing against mine as we passed the towel, the way our eyes met just a little longer than usual. It wasn't awkward, just different. And in some ways, it felt right. Our gym sessions resumed as usual, but there was an undeniable shift. We no longer acted like just friends. We were aware of the charge between us, aware of the physical attraction we couldn't deny. Our interactions had become charged, intense, even when we weren't physically close. One night, we were leaving the gym together, a quiet moment at the end of our usual routine. The air was cool, and the city's lights flickered in the distance. A comfortable silence hung between us, but it was the kind of silence where everything was understood without words. "Hey!" my best friend said, breaking the silence. His voice was soft, but there was a depth to it, a sincerity that caught my attention. "I've been thinking a lot about everything." I turned to look at him, feeling my heart skip a beat. "Yeah, I don't want things to be weird between us," he continued, his words measured, careful. "What happened in the locker room, it didn't change how I feel about you. It didn't change our friendship. I nodded, trying to gather my thoughts. It hadn't changed everything for me either, but I needed to hear him say it. I'm glad you said that. I've been feeling the same way, but it did change something. It made me realize that I care about you more than I thought. He smiled, that familiar, warm smile that always put me at ease. I care about you too. I just don't know what this means yet, but I don't want to lose what we have. We stood there for a moment, looking at each other, the world around us fading away. There was no rush to figure it out, no pressure. We both just needed to be honest with each other, to acknowledge what had happened, and what could happen. I think we'll figure it out, I said softly, the certainty in my voice surprising me. We'll take it one step at a time. His expression softened, and he reached out, his hand brushing against mine once again. This time, there was no hesitation. Yeah, he agreed. One step at a time. We walked back in silence, but this time, it was a different kind of silence. One that wasn't filled with confusion, but with possibility. There were no answers yet, but there was something beautiful in the unknown, in the way our relationship had evolved in ways neither of us could have predicted. We didn't know where this would lead us. We didn't know what the future held for us as friends, or if something more would bloom from the moments we had shared. But, standing there with him, I realized that it didn't matter. What mattered was that we were still here, together. And whatever came next, we would face it together.